Good morning and welcome to another We Are Sunderland morning briefing. My name is Joe Ramage. I'm joined by Matty Hewitt. How are you doing, Matty?
All good, mate. How are you?
Yeah, decent. It's been over a week since we've been on, hasn't it? It's, both been busy doing things. I'm pretending I was half my age jumping around in a field in Glasgow somewhere while you were getting stuck into the pre-season things. That's why we've swapped the roles around a little bit today, and I'm going to be asking Matty the questions because you were away at the first pre-season games, which I suppose is, well, we'll just start straight away there. You know, Sunderland back in action at the weekend, games at South Shields and Gateshead. You were there for both for We Are Sunderland. What was, I guess, your immediate take in Régis Le Bris' first games in charge?
Well, I've just about dried out. It was a pretty damp opener, but the first game I thought Sunderland, obviously they split the squad like they do every year. The under-21s came on. I want to talk about that in a bit. The under-21s came on about the half hour, the hour mark. 70 minutes, and that for me is a bit of a strange dynamic because they played both games. Like Tommy Watson came on 70th minute, and then again you're having a rest and then going again. I don't know about you, but I felt like for the first team players it's fine because you're only playing one half. But for the youngsters, I thought that's pretty strange because I think Caden Kelly picked up a knock in the first game at Shields, so he didn't feature at Gateshead. But what do you think of that? Because for me, that's the more I think about it, the more perplexed I get as to how do you get yourself up, having played 20 minutes, rested, maybe cramped up a little bit, and then had to loosen off again and then go again?
Yeah, going through all your warm-ups and things and then stiffening up on the bus ride over. Yeah, it is a bit of an interesting one. And like you say, obviously no first-team players, I'm guessing, did it. But yeah, not often you see that. I suppose good in the sense that they wanted to give some of the youngsters as much as it goes they can across the two games. But then you just think, well, do it 145 at one and another 45 at Gateshead, wouldn't you? On Watson, you mentioned him there. We'll talk about him. What was he like when he came on and across the two games?
Yeah, interesting. He's bright, usual Sav. I suppose we'll start with Shields for the main game. Sunderland 5-0 up at half time. I mean, that was pretty much as dominant as to be expected. I was actually pretty impressed. And again, I know you've got to take into account the level of opposition. Shields National League North side. But there was some nice little patterns of play. In both games, they line up in a 4-3-3 in possession. With a number 6 and then 2 number 8. So at Shields, it was Dan Neil, as we saw last year, the deeper sort of deep line playmaker with 2 8s either side. Chris Rigg in that central role, which is something that obviously we've spoken about potentially seeing this year. Adil Sheesh was also in that number 8 role, and I thought the energy they had either side of Dan Neil was great. And again, I know I've said about the level of opposition, but Shields couldn't really cope with it. Every time Sunderland went forward, they looked like they were going to score. There was some good transition from wide areas. You'll be pleased to know that, as we said, maybe off camera last year about wanting our fullbacks just to bomb on and provide width. We saw that. I thought Trai Hume and Pat Roberts linked up particularly well down the right. It was good to see Roberts get on the score sheet after he struggled last year. Left back, Joe Anderson played there in the first game. Leo Hjelde was at centre half. Dan Ballard obviously has picked up a knee injury and he'll be out for 6 weeks. Eliza Mayenda impressed me, actually, if I'm being honest. Of the forwards who were sore over the course of those 2 games, he was actually the liveliest, scored, got an assist. I think he had a goal ruled out, of course. But he was bright, pressed from the front. And yeah, I was impressed by him. I didn't think that would be the case heading into that game. But then obviously, as to be expected with pre-season, they made the changes. Second half became a bit more bits and bobby. But yeah, it was a good run out, I think, at Shields.
Yeah, I mean, like you said right at the start, you've got to take the opposition or the level of opposition in context and things like that. But given the way last season ended, I suppose it was nice to see Sunderland scoring some goals.
Yeah, definitely. That was it. I mean,
so many clean sheets and so many just drab games towards the end of last season to come flying out the traps and score a few goals. It must have been quite refreshing for yourself being there and obviously the fans who made the trip in the rain as well.
Yeah, I mean, I had to take 2 looks to make sure I was seeing the right thing. But no, it was good. I was impressed. There was some good little transitions. You could see patterns of play that they've been working on. I must confess that I didn't necessarily see that in the second game at Gateshead. look, Gateshead are a good team, and again, I know we're talking about level of opposition. They're probably a bit aggrieved not to have been a Football League team. It's one of those, isn't it? You read, pre-season's all about fitness rather than results. But I think Sunderland actually had a stronger team out on paper. If you look at it, maybe the midfield at Shields was possibly stronger. That midfield three, as I said, of Neil, Rig, and now Sheesh. But they flattered to deceive a little bit at Gateshead. That looked a bit more like the Sunderland that we saw of last season, a little bit void of ideas, which was surprising. Like I say, given the strength of that squad that they had out there. Again, it was a 4-3-3. You had Job as an 8 out of possession. It looked a bit more like a 4-2-3-1 with Job as a 10 sitting on the holding midfield player. But again, that's pretty similar to what we expected. It was a tough one, that one, I'll be honest with you. They struggled a bit. I think Gateshead's press worked really well. As I said, before we started this, Gateshead have like a diamond in midfield, but with wing backs, so it's pretty difficult to operate against if you're not used to. If you haven't, researched that, it's not me suggesting that they haven't, but it's a pretty unorthodox shape to come up against. There were some odd bits and pieces. I mean, Jack Clarke scored again from the penalty spot. That'll be, that. Be good for him. We spoke to him afterwards about transfer speculation, etc., and how he's focusing just solely on Sunderland, which will be good for fans to hear. But again, as we saw from the last couple of days, transfer speculation now is only going to ramp up, isn't it?
Yeah, just to quickly go back to the systems there as well. I know, again, it's such a small sample size, but from the flavour that you got of that, what was the main differences from what we saw at the end of the season? Because, like I say, it is a similar system which I suppose was probably to be expected. I mean, Mike Dodds kind of touched on it in terms of who came in, had to be a developmental coach and things like that. But with the players that are there as well, they probably wedded to a similar type of system anyway, aren't they?
Now, I think for me, the one thing that Régis Le Bris has to do, and it was picked up on social media, is he has to get Sunderland pressing high again. I think that's something that just seemed like fell off the face of the earth, didn't it? The lack of intensity and high press. And now what you noticed from Sunderland having 2 8s is that they were able to get more bodies closer to the number 9. Now that worked for me at Shields. It was good. It didn't necessarily have the same cohesion at Gateshead, but when you press them with 2 obviously higher, it's better than having a 1 and a 1. You've got more bodies higher up the pitch. They were able to win the ball back in dangerous areas. Eliza Mayenda, I think it was for Chris Riggs' goal, won the ball on the edge of Shields' box through a high press. So you can see, the little seeds being sown of how he wants to operate, turning the ball over and high, in dangerous areas of the pitch. What I did notice as well, now, obviously, when you first look at Régis Le Bris and what sort of head coach he's going to be, there was a suggestion that maybe he would be direct, but when you actually look at his, I know you've said there we've got a small sample size and we do, but when you look at the 2 games, you saw how quickly the interplay between in wide areas of the pitch was to get Sunderland up the pitch. Now, I was pretty impressed by that. Now, if they can obviously tighten that up and improve on that in the, over the course of pre-season, as you would expect, then it looks to me like they're going to be a threat going forward. Again, like I said, you've got to take into account the opposition that you're coming up against. But there were some promising signs there, albeit, 2 very contrasting results.
And what was Le Bris like on the touchline? Again, it's first games. He spoke in his first press conference, and now he's sort of been stood away, just observing things. Was it a case of that? Was there a lot of bits? Was he vocal on the touchline? Was it more just a case of taking in and observing how they were watching? What was he like on the touchline for fans to see?
Yeah, it's interesting because we didn't actually get the chance to speak to him after the game either. We obviously got to speak with Jack Clarke, but yeah, he was pretty animated, but not in the sense of like overly aggressive. He was full of praise at Shields because there were lots of good things to see. I think again, interestingly, if Graham Murty was in the stand again, and we know from Stan, and him standing near us, he's really animated. And in the stands at Shields, when the under-21s were on the pitch, he was dying to get down there and tell them where they should be, what they should be doing. But yeah, he was Le Bris was pretty relaxed, I think. You saw from his little post-match interview that the club put out, it's very calm. He's very aware that there's things still to work on. But yeah, there wasn't too much that you could really take away from Gator, because you're that far away in the press box. You can't really see the ins and outs of what's going on inside that technical area. But at Shields, yeah, he was animated, but also pretty calm and relaxed. Yeah.
Mentioned a couple of players, and there's two that I want to touch on. We'll come to Clarke in a second, but Patrick Roberts, we spoke quite a lot about him and how important this pre-season is, off the back of a disappointing season. Only 2 assists, didn't get a goal to his name last season. Few injury problems as well. Scores a goal, assists a goal. Again, take the opposition and the fact that it's a pre-season friendly into context, because he did score in pre-season last season, I think, as well. But like I said at the start, nice to see Sunderland scoring goals. Nice to see him involved in goals as well.
Yeah, I think as well, one of the strengths, or at least one of the early strengths that you could tell from this system, was down to the strength in wide areas. So, for example, we spoke about just at times where Trai Hume would pop up in a number 10 position and would be left there scratching our heads as, why is he there? Surely you'd want Patrick Roberts there. But in this case, you had Trai Hume underlapping, taking a runner away, and that left Patrick Roberts in acres of space. And instead of last season, where I would see Roberts standing there with his hands in the air, like, give him the ball, they actually got the ball out wide, and that suited them down to a T. He could then play a quick 1-2 inside to Hume, and he was in behind. Now, that will only benefit Patrick Roberts this season if Sunderland continue to operate in that fashion. You saw, it is, the peak of his powers, how good he is in tight areas of the pitch. Yes, he had a pretty poor season last season. I think he's under no illusion about that himself. Mike Dodds came out and said, look, that the player himself will be looking at it hard at himself over the course of the summer. And if, an improvement in his form this year will be massive in terms of where Sunderland end up this season.
Yeah, you've almost taken the words out of my mouth there. I mean, that first season back in the Championship, 5 goals, 7 assists. Like I say, last season, only 2 assists to his name. Clarke was the only one who had double figures in terms of goals and assists. It's going to be vital for Régis Le Bris to get Patrick Roberts somewhere back to what we saw in that first season back in the Championship this season, just to take some of the burden off Clarke. That's irrespective of what happens at the centre-forward position in terms of getting more out of the players there and potentially whoever comes in.
Yeah, it's not just Roberts either, is it? I mean, it's, the likes of Abdullah Bar, who's, he was injured, missed out on the 2 friendlies there. Romain Mundell looked bright, sharp down that left-hand side. He's another one who just seemingly, disappeared off the face of the earth after featuring in the first couple of games. I thought he was impressive at Birmingham for the first, hour or so before running out of steam. But that's it. It's getting more from those creative players as well, in terms of output and goal contributions.
And Jack Clarke, I have to mention him, obviously, you see on the score sheet again at Gateshead, Sunderland's key player. But I guess one thing that people might be interested in is the injury. I think it's fair to say when he came back at the end of last season, he probably did look a little bit off the pace compared to what we saw in the first half of the season, where, he was just incredible, really, with the numbers that he was putting out. Like I say, that he had the burden of pretty much everything for Sunderland last season. And then when he came back, the form had totally dropped off a cliff. Michael Beale had gone, and I think the injury did play its part in those final 6 weeks. Was there any signs of the injury still plaguing him or anything, or did he certainly look as though he's fit enough to be starting and have a good run of pre-season again?
No, he looked, I say back to his usual self as he can be at this stage of pre-season. We spoke to him afterwards, and he said that he's fine. There's still so many question marks around Jack Clarke, isn't there? No Sunderland fan would, begrudge him a move to the Premier League, which I think is where many expect him to be. Whether that, transpires this summer remains to be seen. I mean, you just look at some of the figures being bandied about for players at the moment, and for Sunderland to be asking for something in the region of, for example, 20 to 30 million isn't unrealistic when you look at some of the figures that, other players are going for. That for me is, it's important that doesn't become a saga throughout the course of the summer, because he's such a key, influential player. You saw last year, I think Hull away, a perfect example, Rotherham, where he just dug something out of nowhere and rescued Sunderland valuable points on the road. And he's such a good player, and getting him anywhere near standards that he hit last year. He said afterwards that he feels like he can improve. He feels like he can bring more. I mean, if he can bring more, then Sunderland have got a hell of a player if they keep him for another year.
Yeah, that was again. I was touching on those comments. He has come out and sort of said, well, he said it at the end of last season as well when he got the Player of the Year award, that he feels as though there's still some things he can improve on. There were some chances that he missed, which I suppose if you're being overly critical, you can go back and think, yeah, he possibly could have done. But that's a really good prospect for Sunderland fans to think that he's in the mindset of thinking he can go better than what he did over the last 2 seasons as well.
Yeah, like I said, though, for me, it's always just going to have that little niggling, away in the back of your mind. Is he going to be here? Is he not going to be here? I mean, he's professional enough. You've seen throughout his time at Sunderland, no matter who he's been linked with, Lazio, Burnley, he's turned up and performed, and you can't. I think fans take to that. You respect a player. It's not like he's throwing his toys out the pram and trying to force a move away. And that just that's just the player he is. And I think it's that's testament to the recruitment work as well, in terms of bringing in the right characters.
Just to sort of finish up, because we're going into some transfer stuff shortly, but finish up on pre-season. You're heading over to Spain for a couple of games this weekend. Having been to them first 2 games, been to the press conference, seen a little bit of inside training, a couple of weeks under Régis Le Bris' belt now. What are you hoping to see? What are you wanting to see from those games and from the training sessions in Spain? Obviously, a step up in intensity. You mentioned like Romain Mundel there, for example. Do you want to see more from players like him, as well as who we've just mentioned in terms of Roberts and Clarke? What is the main thing to get out of this next few days over in Spain with the 2 games as well?
I'm quite intrigued to see how it plays out in terms of what teams he fields, because unlike Shields Gateshead, where you're playing 2 in one game, will he field a stronger team against stronger opposition in Forest, so they can really test themselves and see where they're at? Obviously, they've had the blow of Dan Ballard not being there. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, to be fair. I do think we'll see the same, a 4-3-3 in possession, a 4-4-2 out of possession. It's interesting. I know we spoke about it, but Tommy Watson, I'm excited to see what sort of involvement he gets. Because again, he came off the bench and he looked sharp, but is he ready to make the step up? I mean, that was one of the the question marks, not necessarily from supporters. There was a clamour there from red and white supporters to see Tommy Watson play towards the end of last season. He did come on the final game of the season, but is he ready? It suggests
it's telling though that he's the one who's been named in the squad, isn't it, to go out there? I think it's telling he's gone out
it
there.
Suggests to me by his inclusion that there's now a belief that he is ready to step up. Hopefully he grasps that opportunity with both hands. He's so quick, he's electric when he's got the ball at his feet. And if Jack Clarke is to leave again, I'm not applying such huge pressure on him. But there's a player there for Sunderland to really mould into something.
No, it should be good. And obviously, if you want to keep up to date with everything that's happening in Spain, make sure you stay up to date with what Matty's doing over there with We Are Sunderland. We also got confirmation of the final pre-season game last night, Marseille, which will actually take place at Valley Parade. That was a bit of a strange one, wasn't it? To commemorate Robbie Louis Dreyfus. Yeah, good fixture, but 100 miles away.
Yeah, it's a strange one, isn't it? I mean, obviously Sunderland's, the Stadium of Light's not going to be ready because of all the work that they haven't done to the ground in an attempt to get it ready for the first game of the season. I'm surprised that we haven't actually seen that link up before, a Marseille, Sunderland pre-season. I know it's the 15th anniversary of that, but at Valley Parade, yeah, it's a bit of a strange one. It sort of rounds off a strange run of fixtures, I think, in terms of pre-season. They're dotted about a bit here, there and everywhere. It's a shame that supporters won't get to see, the lads at the Stadium of Light before heading into the pre-season. I know not everyone packs, the home ground out of the rafters, but I think it's nice to get at least one game in there, isn't it, before the business season starts.
Yeah, certainly a big name team like Marseille. But you mentioned the start of the season there, one player who's very much in doubt now is Dan Ballard, who you referenced there. Picked up a knee injury, underwent minor surgery. Obviously, hasn't travelled with the squad to Spain. He's going to do his rehab at the Academy of Light. Doesn't necessarily sound serious, but either way, it's not great, is it, losing him? Arguably, probably for the first month of the season, is it?
Yeah, now I'm keen to pick your brains on this as well, because it's something that I've just been having a conversation about with me pal. Do you think Sunderland need another centre-half? Because there's been, the Luke O'Nien debate came up again. And in my opinion, look, he is a centre-half. You need to move past this. He's played there, 2-3 years now. It's not necessarily a square peg in a round hole. You can look at his stats from last year. We did a bit earlier this year that he does rank highly. I think, fitness issues were part of Sunderland's, downfall last year. Adji was out. Now he's fit. I actually think, for me, I know I've just said about Luke O'Nien being one of the, the best centre halves in the Championship statistically. I'd like to see an Adji at centre half with Dan Ballard at some stage. I know he's out injured, so Adji and Luke, I'd be perfectly comfortable with that. You've got Leo Hjelde, who has played at centre half. Like I said, I do think there will be, a number of players leaving the club this summer. Joe Anderson, I think he's probably a centre half rather than a left back. They do have options there. You've got Jensen Seelt, who's obviously he's out with a lengthy injury. I don't necessarily think they need another centre half. I think maybe a left back on loan, just to because when Niall Huggins comes back in, you have an option there. What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot will depend on this rehab for Ballard.
Yeah.
One thing that we got out of him and O'Nien was a lot of robustness last year. I think they played 43 games. The only games they missed was the 3 that they were suspended.
Yeah.
Whereas the season before, his first season, obviously, he struggled a bit with injury. I think he broke his foot on his debut against Coventry, and then he missed the last couple of months with hamstring problems as well. So it was nice for him to get a full season under his belt last season.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't necessarily say that this is a big setback, assuming he comes back sort of on the time frame in terms of end of August, maybe. That being the case, I wouldn't say you do need another centre back, because, like you say, I think there's a lot of hope on Adji Elisa this season to kick on and get back to the sort of form that we saw him in that first season, where he was one of the players that you're thinking, yeah, this is a good bit of recruitment that Sunderland have done here. And in that centre back role as well, we've spoke a few times about whether they'll play a 3. If you go with O'Nien and Ballard and Elise as a 3, and then push wing backs further up with Hume and Serkin, very much an option depending on who's fit and who's not. But yeah, at the minute, I don't think that they probably would need to go, or certainly not as pressing as other issues on the pitch. I think still need, even though they brought Alan Brown in, another midfielder probably would be welcome, and obviously the centre forward. But it's a good chance for Adji Elise as well, these pre-season games now, to state a claim and make sure that he's going to be in there come the first day of the season, really, down at Cardiff. And I mentioned Alan Brown there, and I didn't talk about him in those games. What was the thoughts on him and his first appearance?
Well, the problem is he didn't make an appearance. So what they did was Brown did a bit of fitness work at Shields, but prior to the game, but then he didn't feature. The general thinking is that he'll now step up. They're giving him the weekend off, so to speak. He was there in person but didn't play. So it's expected, he'll feature against Forest or Eldense. He's out there in Spain. I'm interested. I'm pretty intrigued, actually. He's one of the players who I'm looking forward to seeing. Like you say, though, I was about to say expect. I don't expect. I really want Sunderland to bring in a number 6 because they need strengthening in that area. And I think the Pierre Ekwah sort of transfer speculation that's come out, that's interesting. Sunderland do have, when you look at the squad that they put out, you've got Jay Matete, Elliot Embleton, Pierre Ekwah. I might be reading too much into this, but I thought the fact that Pierre Ekwah came on at the second half of Gateshead, along with a number of under-21s, I'm not sure if that was, I don't know, for me, that felt a bit strange. Given the fact that, he played, he was around. He played an awful lot last year. He was one of Sunderland's starting midfielders, and I just thought it was a little bit peculiar that he came on. I could be reading it too much into it. It could be nothing. But then with transfer speculation, obviously suggesting that Udinese are, interested. Could that have played a part? I mean, we'll see.
Yeah, well, just sort of offer some context there. Everyone's favourite global journalist, Fabrizio Romano, came out last night and said that Udinese have made Pierre Ekwah sort of one of their top transfer targets. And they've sort of lodged an approach to Sunderland as well. Does it surprise you? I mean, there was interest in him last summer. I think Stuttgart were interested in him. like you say, he has established himself as a regular last season. In and out of form, I think he's one that does blow hot and cold a little bit. The positional debate is one that has sort of caught us out quite a lot over the course of that last season. If you think back to when he came in January 2023, struggled initially, but then he had a storming end to that season. I always go back to that Luton semi-final first leg where he was immense in the 2-1 win. That really sort of triggered him to where you think he can go and make himself a really key player in the Sunderland side for last season. Started okay, got the injury setback, was out for a month or so, maybe rushed back because of Sunderland didn't have any other options in there really. And then, he sort of blew hot and cold a bit. He had a good run sort of January, February time where he scored a couple of goals. I remember we spoke to him after that Plymouth game where he scored one of his 5 goals last season. He was a case of, I'm 100% happy here, love it here. He still couldn't quite believe that he played here, like 40,000 people in the crowd every other week. And, he mentioned how this is the best place for him to play as a young player and develop, and how even though he's only 21, 22, he was at that point getting... Coaches were telling him to take more responsibility on the pitch and be more vocal, and he quite enjoyed that he was getting that at quite a young age. So it points to, I know we're going back a couple of months there, but it points towards things being right in place for him at the club, the way that they do things. But equally, interest from Europe again this summer. Do you think he's one that someone could look to cash in on if there's a decent fee there?
Now, for me, I think the fact that we are will this be his second full season?
Yeah.
It's tough. Like you say, on his day, he's great. But for me, I think there were far too many occasions last year where he blew cold rather than blowing hot. Now, I do like Ekwah. I think he's a Rolls Royce for midfielder. But it strikes to me now, like, this is just my opinion, that it might be the time to cash in on somebody like Pierre Ekwah. But there's obviously the caveat that you replace him with somebody better. Now that's the case with any transfer, isn't it? Look, you're only that deal will only be viewed as a success if the replacement is an improvement on him. Now, this is why this summer is such a huge summer for the club. I mean, there's going to be plenty of interest. We'll talk about Trai Hume in a little bit. For me, I think the comments that Christian Speakman made earlier this summer were interesting. It's about quality, not quantity. Last year was very much about they brought in a number of young talents, who probably weren't, at the level. I mean, we've spoke about that loads on here. Whereas this year, it's about improving the squad. If Ekwah goes, can you improve it? I'm going to be honest, I think you can. What do you think?
I think one thing as well is the fee. I think it's widely reported. Certainly West Ham side sources have suggested there's quite a hefty sell-on clause in there. So you need to get a fee where you're not going to be losing most of it in terms of what you'd then be on to West Ham for what they put in that. I'm inclined to agree. I think if you look at all of the players that have been linked or are potentially going to be linked with moves away this summer, Ekwah will probably be quite a way down the list in terms of people you'd be desperate to keep. Jack Clarke would obviously be at the top who you'd want to keep, and then you'd work your way down. Someone like Dan Ballard, who's got interest as well, you'd be wanting to keep him. Dan Neil, you'd be wanting to keep him. You look at other players, maybe Ekwah will be one where you think, can we go on, if there's a decent fee there? You mentioned Alan Brown coming in. You hope that he can continue sort of the amount of games and the minutes that he's played for Preston over the course of the last 10 years. Can you get someone like him in? Yeah, it's an interesting one. I also think just a move, you look at how Ekwah's played, you almost wonder whether the European style of football might suit him a little bit more at this stage of his career. So it's certainly one to monitor, I think, if there's a substantial fee or any substance that comes in from Udinese. You mentioned Trai Hume there. There's also reports of Galatasaray linked with him. So I understand that might not necessarily be the case. Having said that, you equally wouldn't be surprised if there is a club that comes in for Trai Hume at some point this summer, wouldn't you? Look at Leeds United. I think there's some suggestions of them possibly looking at him after selling Archie Gray. I mean, his stats last season in the Championship defensively, I think he ranked number 1 when it comes to tackles and interceptions and things like that. Undoubtedly a really talented player, and another example of the recruitment model working really well when they get it right. Came in from midfield for peanuts almost, is what Mike Dodds called it last season, and he's gone on. He's become a really established Championship player, hasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, as you say there, look, I understand that there hasn't, yet been a bid for Trai Hume, but I think just there when you're listing the clubs that were interested in him, I mean, Leeds United, that's just someone who I know who covers Leeds got in touch with me and asked, just sort of an off the record, what's the lay of the land with Trai Hume at Sunderland? And I couldn't really answer, because while I think Trey's heart is set on the Premier League, and I do think he will go on to play there. That's not me suggesting that he's trying to force away a move by any stretch of the imagination. I just think he's good enough to play there. Would a move to Leeds appeal to him? Again, like you say there, for me, that it's the finances, isn't it? The finances would dictate any sort of bargaining between. Are Sunderland going to want to strengthen a Championship rival? Not really. Sunderland have playoff aspirations of their own. Leeds finished in the playoffs last year. For me, I think Leeds would be a hard sell from a Sunderland point of view in terms of a selling club. I'd struggle to see that one unless the finances were, severely inflated. But if a Premier League club were to come knocking, I mean, I don't think you can begrudge him move. He's another one who every time he's pulled on that shirt, he's been phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, I've gone through the players there. You mentioned, Clarke, Neil, and Ballard. Hume often kind of gets overlooked, by ourselves, and I think supporters as well. But I do think if he was one that ended up going, you would notice that there would be a considerable gap left on that right-hand side. Now, you mentioned finances there as well, and I'll go back to Leeds in terms of they've obviously just got the windfall from Archie Gray. What was it, 30, 35 million?
Yeah.
Now, I'm not for 1 second saying that Trai Hume should be bringing in 30, 35 million quid, but equally, if there's a Championship rival who, in theory, at this stage, you're thinking that you're going to be competing with for automatic promotion, and they've just got that kind of money for a fullback with the experience that he's had. $1 million question: what sort of fee do you think someone could or should be commanding for someone like Trai Hume? He's possibly going into the international setup as well with Northern Ireland, and like I say, he's become an established fullback at the Championship now.
It's so hard to answer, isn't it? Because I think even back in the day, you were seeing just transfer figures are just so inflated that the Saudi money that came in, either last year or the year before, it's just astronomical, and that's just had a knock-on impact everywhere. You're seeing players who haven't played or have hardly kicked the ball for first-team Premier League sides going for 20-odd million, and it's just ludicrous. And then you've got suggestions of a £7 million bid coming in for Trai Hume, who respectfully is probably further on in his career and at a higher standard than some of these youngsters that are moving between academies at Premier League level. If I'm being honest, I don't think I could even put a figure on it. 15, even then, is that too low?
Yeah.
20, even then, it's just, these are just figures that I'm sort of plucking off the top of my head because it's ludicrous at the minute. But you're right to suggest, look, the benchmark is being set by other clubs, so why can't the likes of Sunderland hold out for a bigger fee? We spoke about Jack Clarke earlier on at the beginning. The figures being quoted are astronomical.
I think the one thing, and we've said this quite a few times, isn't it, that the club have held firm on the stance with when it comes to selling players. I mean, I'm just scrolling here, go back to some of Christian Speakman's quotes from a fortnight ago, where he sort of touched on selling players. I think we can all say player retention we've had a really strong record on that. We'll just take every piece of interest or every discussion that happens along the way for what it is at that point in time. I think the danger with the transfer window is it's always an uncertain period, but our intent and our objective has always been to retain our talent. You can't really disagree with that, can you? Because they have got a good record with that, for as much as what people might have had flaws with the ownership model and the recruitment and things over the last 6 months and just the way things have happened. Player retention and getting value for money is absolutely one thing that they've held firm and held good on the word on throughout.
Yeah, that's been a real strength, hasn't it? The only maybe one thing that sticks out for me is the Ross Stewart situation. That's one where it's tough. Is it the reinvestment part that went wrong in terms of the money, how much money they spent elsewhere? Because everyone, there were so many questions. Where did that investment go? It's been made clear that it was reinvested into the squad. that's where the question marks start to, to come up, isn't it? Again, we've spoken so many times, and I'm at the risk of sounding like a broken record about why this summer's so important. But say you do lose a Trai Hume, for example, a Jack Clarke. They talk about succession planning. We saw Romain Mundle come in last year. Is he going to produce those Jack Clarke numbers? That remains to be seen. It's about the next one. It's always about the next one. With this type of model, that's how it has to be. You're not going to go out and buy a ready-made. I know would love that. I'd certainly love that. I'd love, an Ellis Sims to have came in, on the back of Ross Stewart going, but that didn't happen. There does still need to be some tweaking. We've seen Alan Brown come in. We've seen Simon Moore come in. There has been experienced heads come in. I would like to see that continue. For me, we're just left in a bit of a limbo period, aren't we? Talking hypothetically about who would like to see come in terms of transfers, but they have to look. There's no beating around the bush. They have to get it right.
Yeah, I think just to finish up on the top transfer stuff as well, one thing you would say with whether it's Ekwah, Hume, Clarke, Neil, Patterson, Ballard, we listen a long line of players' names here. It's testament to the recruitment as well when they've got it right previously. Look, we all know last summer and probably the January transfer window, Mundle might come good, but in the last two transfer windows in particular have fallen short. Prior to that, there's been some good business done, and that's why there's a lot of these players being linked with top teams across Europe who might possibly pay a hefty sum of money for some of these players. That is a testament to some of the recruitment.
Yeah, look, it's not going to appease anybody given how, dismal last season ended, but Sunderland are actually in a really strong position in terms of, the squad value that they've got. We're talking about numerous players who could be worth, increasing of 10 million up to 15 million, 20 million. You've got, Patterson, who you've mentioned there. We've got Trai Hume, who are also thrown in that bracket. Dan Ballard, Dan Neil, Jack Clarke. You've got so many players and a plethora of talent. How many of those have I just named that are academy graduates as well? You've got Chris Rigg, who's such a highly rated prospect, signed his first professional deal. Say he has another impressive season. There's nothing to stop, big European clubs come sniffing. Now, though, Sunderland will be, in line for a big financial windfall if a transfer bid does come in. Sunderland are in a really strong position when it comes to that. Now, I know that doesn't help. That doesn't, get results. That doesn't mean that you're going to get 3 points on a Saturday. But they are in a really strong financial position now. I think if Régis Le Bris is to get a tune out of them, look, for me, I'm on a bit more of a positive footing than we ended last season. But again, I'd just like to see the odd bit of quality sprinkled in here and there. I think there was a good point made. I forget who brought it up on social media over the course of the weekend about, this squad finished in the playoffs. There's not too much change. Obviously, you've lost 3 or 4 players. The core of that squad is still there. And again, there was injuries, etc. There's so many factors that played into it. But yeah, I'm trying to be positive heading into the rest of pre-season and next season.
No, that's it, and that's a good place to end it. Thanks for joining us again this morning, Matty. Make sure you've got your Factor 50 and get a nice tan while you're out there in Spain. Everything that's happening over there, the 2 friendly fixtures as well. Forest and Eldense, stay up to date with everything that Matty's doing over at We Are Sunderland, and we will join you for a review of that trip at some point next week, I'm sure. Thanks very much for joining us.
Cheers.